Today on Something to Talk About, I can't even single out a particular topic to speak with Father Fran Hezel. We have been talking to him for several years now, and every time I sit down with him, I learn something new. And I expect the same of the interview that I'll have today, because I really believe that he is one of the most interesting men in the world. That's ahead on Something to Talk About. Welcome to Something to Talk About. Here we are in King's Restaurant in Tamuning in our corner table, breaking bread today with Father Fran Hezel. We're so happy to have you at the table with us. Thanks a lot for blessing the food, first of all.
Okay. Thanks,
nice
Betty. It's part of my job.
Yeah, part of his job.
And also, let me say that it's nice to get here because many times I've seen people here, and I've wondered what it must be like to be on TV. So I've got my big chance now.
This is your chance. I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to connect, and thank you to the King's family for putting out another great spread. Of course, we always have our fruit, but I thought we'd I actually wanted to put bread on just to say we were breaking bread, but it's figuratively. And of course they've got a meatloaf on special for today, so we're really happy about that. Thanks for coming in, and I appreciate the conversations that we always have. These table. This is the first time we've ever been able to do it over food, so help yourself to anything that you want.
Thanks.
Are you a light eater, by the way? Because I've thrown food at him from the moment he sat down, but he's cautious.
The Dominican sisters who invite me for lunch every once in a while, because I say Mass there, know that my bon mot is that lunch is for wimps. So they throw that in my face, from time to time.
Right.
But the truth is that I was very fond of lunch when I was back in Buffalo and when I entered the Jesuits. In fact, I ate hearty lunches and dinners and breakfast. I had to cut back when I came to Micronesia because I found that the heat, the humidity, and the food all produced to put you to sleep.
Yeah.
That couldn't be because I had 1 o'clock classes in the afternoon.
No, you can't fall asleep.
Yeah. So I stopped.
So you stop eating hearty lunches. Mm-hmm. There really is no rest for the weary in these cases, especially with you. As a person who's scholarly at heart and clearly by Jesuit nature, your natural curiosity for this region and some of the subject matter has kept you really always on your toes and constantly searching for information.
Yes, that's true. I'm a curious person. I like to know not just the background of a particular person, but the whole ambiance, of the place, the culture, I suppose. I never had any intentions of becoming a cultural anthropologist. I never wanted to do it as a discipline, but I wanted to understand people and their society better. I always had a compulsion to do this. But speaking of compulsions, I also had a compulsion to write. And I think that's translated into a workaholism. At least that's what my friends tell me.
Yeah,
but I hope it's been a productive one.
You have a new project. It's a documentary that has just come out called Before We Began Counting Years.
Yes.
And this is sort of a detail of history before we knew the history that we have available to us and all the resources. And you were curious then too about what was happening in early Chamorro settlements, that you wanted to know what life was like?
Yes. I've always been fascinated by Guam. Guam has a particular interest for me because I landed here before I went to any place in Micronesia. I was here for 3 weeks trying to get out in the good old days in 1963 when there was one flight a week, and that was a 16-seater, SA-16, going to Chuuk. so I could begin teaching at Xavier High School. So I spent 3 weeks in Guam, got used to geckos climbing up the wall, nonstop heat and humidity and things like that. Before the days of air conditioning, we were staying at the Capuchin Friary. But I was fascinated by the place, and I was even more fascinated by it a year later when I came back after my first year in Chuuk, because it looked like a Mecca. It looked like a Mecca. It was island style. People were as gracious, as I remember, as they were in Micronesia. But they had a degree of, I don't want to say sophistication, but they had a degree of modernization. They had certain comforts that we didn't have in Chuuk. They had a bowling alley. They had a drive-in movie theater. They had places that you could go and blow off steam. It was good. They also had high school proms, and we wouldn't have thought of such a thing at Xavier in those days.
Yeah.
Because girls and boys just didn't have that kind of contact publicly.
You were sent here by the Jesuits to teach at Xavier?
Well, I was given an opportunity to volunteer, so I volunteered. I volunteered because I had a fascination with the overseas. I think a fascination that became stronger and stronger when I found out about Micronesia. Let me just say that in novitiate, we novices, second-year novices, were asked to do a presentation on some mission part of the world. It so happened that my mission was Micronesia. I didn't pick it.
Somebody pick it for you?
Yeah.
Oh.
Then I found out that this is a mission of the New York province, and this is a mission of later on the Buffalo province. So it's the one that's open to me. I volunteered for it and was accepted, but only after 3 months, because they only needed one person to come out to begin teaching at Xavier. But my competitor, I didn't know this at the time, was a Palauan who was in studies in the Philippines. He left before Christmas. If he hadn't left, he would have gone, by birthright, to become the.
Yeah.
And I would have ended up in New York. My whole life would have been entirely
New
different.
York,
Yeah. I'm glad it worked out this way.
Okay. Did you ever want to go back though?
No.
Really?
I think that.
Did your family ever say try to come back?
No, they were very tolerant of that. But then again, you have to understand that all my brothers were Jesuits at that time. They've left since then, and my father was encouraged to start thinking about becoming a Jesuit since there was nobody left. My mother had died many years
Really?
before
Did he?
that. No, he didn't.
Well, that would have been awkward.
No, he felt that he had to keep the home fires burning just in case somebody left, and of course they did.
Yeah. Wow.
So he was there.
Wow.
No, but with Micronesia, you fall in love with a place in the first year, or you don't. If you manage to stay for the end of the first year, you're changed. And I've seen this again and again, not just with Jesuits, but with Peace Corps volunteers, with our own volunteer teachers, the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. I've seen people that have come, that go back to the States, and they're suffering from reverse culture shock, I think Peace Corps calls it. It's not a transition to island life, it's a transition back home after you get used to island life.
Yeah.
And it's not just palm trees and mangoes and exotic fruits and the weather and the neat beaches and things like this. It's a sense that, at least as I see it operating on myself, it's a sense that you're taken in as a family member, as a stranger. At least you feel that way, Maybe that's not the intention of people, but that's certainly the way it comes across
It just
to
kind
most
of
of us
comes out
Americans.
organically, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you had pursued a part of the history that a lot of people maybe have paid attention. Clearly, it's been studied and researched. But I really understood your take on your research on the early days that your of ancient Chamorro life, that you wanted to prove to Chamorros that they are not necessarily victims of this of things and discoveries before them.
Yes.
That they were self-sustaining people, that they had great ideas, that they could travel and they could farm and they could survive without the introduction of these things from other cultures.
Yes. My feeling has always been that I don't want to ever come across as patronizing, but I think that anybody who comes here and looks at the place, and appreciates it, has an understanding that there's something unique and there's something important about that uniqueness of the people. And that uniqueness doesn't need to be, the kind of exotic dances that are associated with the very first days of history. It comes out in all kinds of different ways. What I was hoping to do is help people appreciate that. Not that it takes me to do it. I mean, people have an understanding of this on their own, but I've also been interested in public education. And public education for me means being a conversation partner with the public. So what it means is dangling ideas, if you want, throwing out ideas, throwing out seeds, and letting that be taken up in discussion.
The discussion so far since the film has been released, have you run it through some of the scholars on Guam to determine, to see how they felt about it? Or
Yeah, even yesterday I got something in Facebook because, see, the film is saying that the first settlement of the Marianas occurred a little bit before 1500 BC. Now that's 3,500 years ago. I got interested in the project because it seemed to me that everybody was focusing on what happened 1000 AD, so 1,000 years ago, with the latte stones and the Lusong and all that. But there was a much richer and longer history before that, and that's why the film was called Before We Began Counting Years. A richer history of that include a few firsts. Probably the longest voyage, open sea voyage in the Pacific up to that point, just prior to the settlement here, and of course the earliest settlement in remote Oceania of any island society. So that the earliest Chamorros, or if you want to call them the settlers of the Marianas, were here before anybody else was in what we call the remote Pacific. And by the remote Pacific, all we're talking about is most of the Pacific, anything excluding Papua New Guinea, which is really just a stone's throw away from the land bridge that once connected Asia from and Indonesia from the island Pacific.
well, it's an interesting documentary. I was really interested in how the other scholars and educators would feel about it, because I know that you'd like to introduce this into the schools. We're talking with Father Fran Hiesel. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the documentary and how you could actually get to see it. But there are other issues that I think that you are well bred on, and these are issues that have to do with our neighbors in other Pacific Island cultures. We're with Father Fran Hiesel. We'll be right back. Thank you for coming back and joining us in our conversation with Father Fran. Before we left the break, we were talking a bit about the documentary, the reason why that you came up with this idea to sort of introduce this period of our history and the reasons for it. I know that the documentary has been released. Who do you want to see it?
Well, I'd like educators to see it, and I'd like it to get out in some form or fashion to other people as well, the normal community here, particularly the ethnic Marianas community, if you want. People to, because I feel that we need to look backwards in order to make our way forward. I think my feeling has always been that things like history build into our identity, our self-awareness of who we are as a people. And I'd prefer to see that. So I'd like to see everybody take advantage of that if they could. Not that they have to agree with it.
Right.
It's just a starter.
In the work that you do, this is, you are a Catholic priest, and I've wanted to know how you translate all of this research and all of these findings into what you talk to, the people about at the pulpit.
Yeah, I don't talk about history usually. What I do try to, the point I do try to make is that as a priest, that God calls us and challenges us to do what we can to give ourselves for other people, all of us, not just priests and sisters, but all of us in one way or other. And we are supposed to respond to this. What I sometimes tell them is that I'm a housing project boy. I grew up in a housing project in Buffalo, and my father used to give haircuts to the kid who was living 2 apartments down because he knew that they didn't have the money to afford that, and so he included the kids in that. We had this tradition of the family, even though we didn't have much, and even though I was ashamed to invite people to our little housing project, after graduation from high school. The family was always raised in such a way that we felt it was important to share what we had with other people. We always felt that we had to invite other people in, just as we were invited in to other people's places. Now I know that sounds a little bit blah, but what I mean by that is that when I went to Canisius High School, Jesuit High School, I began to see that the neighborhood was bigger than I thought it was when I was growing up. It wasn't a group of lower middle class people who were ethnically German and Irish. It included Italians and Poles and everybody else, blacks and such. And just as we all got welcomed into this community, I felt that it was important for me never to forget the people who were regarded as outsiders by inviting them in to being a part of whatever was going on and taking care of them in some way. So when I volunteered for the missions and people said, and I did get this criticism, at least when I came back to the missions in 1969 after I was ordained a priest, people said, why are you going there? There's only a couple 100,000 people, if that. These are not headline makers. Why don't you go to the favelas of Latin America and do something that's going to make a difference? And I remember being indignant when I heard that. I remember saying, if that's what it takes to make a difference, then I don't want to make a difference. What I want to do is take care of people, or try to take care of people, who might be forgotten. And just like these little kids, they used to live a couple of blocks down from us, to take care of that, and to take care of them, and to provide some way or other for these people. And
then you must have a natural sensitivity then to the societal pressures that some of our island neighbors have coming to a place like Guam.
Yes. And I'm torn on this. I sympathize with the people here, who have to provide services for people who sometimes appear to be ungrateful, who are expected to roll out the carpet and then to do more and more and more for people. I get that myself. When these people come and they see me and they ask for 20 or 40 bucks, and then 3 days later they're back for another 20 or 40 and so forth, and I keep asking, when does this stop? I mean, at what point do you begin to take over responsibility for yourself? I also know Chukis who are terribly embarrassed by what's going on. Many of the Chukis are ashamed. They pick up their morning paper with a certain sense of anxiety.
Yeah.
They're afraid that it's going to be another Hemlani Apartments thing, or it's going to be someone
that
guy.
they know.
Yeah, and they know that all these things are shaming them,
Yeah.
And that's why in the States, they have where they have a luxury that they don't have here of bonding in small groups, in communities of 60 or 70 or 100 or 150. The old timer, the person who's the gatekeeper of the community, always reminds people when they come in, remember, you're very welcome here. We're happy to have you as fellow Chukis or as fellow Panapans, but don't screw up. Don't embarrass us. We're getting along well with people here now, and we don't want problems. This is a normal function of people who serve in that role in the States.
Which is the place where you said in our radio interview recently, you said you think that those migrants who are not working and who are not getting an education and are simply existing in some pretty bad conditions should leave Guam.
Yes.
And go to Portland or go to Ohio, did you say?
Go to Kansas City.
Kansas City.
Kansas City, because those are the two epicenters of Micronesian migration. They're food production centers also. They're places where you can get a job. You don't have to be very skilled. And housing is cheap. They mostly live in semi-rural communities or kind of run-down places. And many of the communities do well for themselves. They have good relations with the Americans living there. And it's a group, because of the fact that these communities are tailored, they're, as I said, 100, 150 people. They can provide the custodianship that they need for the people who come there who can't seem to take care of themselves completely.
And the idea wasn't to kick them off Guam because they're no good. It would be to force them into a community where there are jobs that are readily available and they're always looking. So
that's right.
So they could, as soon as you arrive, you could start a new life.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
It's hard to convince them, though. I mean, it's hard
It's
to
hard to
convince them.
convince them because Guam is closed to Micronesia. So when somebody dies, you get on the island hopper and you're down there.
going.
Yeah, you're down there within a day or two.
Of all the years that you've spent in this area, how many languages do you speak?
Oh, I speak, well, first of all, English not so well. Buffalonian.
Buffalonian.
They told me that. No, I speak Chukis. I can do reasonably well in Chukis. Panapan, I can answer the phone and carry on a short conversation. I should be able to do more than that, but I think that Chukis got in the way, and I think that coming here is even cut back a little bit on the small amount that I did know.
Do you speak Chamorro, or do you understand? some
No,
of
I
it?
don't. I'm beginning to understand certain things like mami and hami and things like that. The hita mangilao,
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
Only the basic simple stuff, huh?
Do you think I've got about a minute left? Do you think that there is hope for this situation that we're in with the migrants and with the clashing of ethnic groups? Is there?
Yes, I think there's hope. I think there's hope, and I think that the part of the reason for my interest in it, aside from what I've said already, is the fact that the Scripture is pretty clear on this. You take care of the stranger and the homeless. There's no messing around with that. That's Old Testament stuff, and that is strong in the New Testament as well. The old passage from Matthew 25. But I think it has a human reason, a human explanation for that. After all, you were exiles once, so you take care of these people who come into your place as exiles or migrants. You remember the days that if I talk about Guam, that there were 800 Guamanians in Hawaii in 1880 in search of the same thing that these people here are in search of, jobs, a better life. You remember the tradition of picking up people who come in with legs. I mentioned this in the radio program, I think, legs coated with seawater, and you pick them up and take care of them. And that's a cultural tradition, not just a scriptural tradition. So, in other words, be true to your best selves, you know, both religiously and culturally, and take care of these people even though it's hard. I think that the people, Micronesians that I've spoken to, appreciate this. They know something about what Guamanians are going through. They're embarrassed for people, you know, who are sort of toughing it out, and appreciate the fact that they're trying to live not only the gospel but their culture.
Awesome talking to you as usual. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Father Fran.
Thank
Thank you
you
for joining us. I appreciate it. We'll see you next time on Something to Talk About.